Welcome back to the deep dive. Look, I'm just going to be honest with you right out of the gate here. If you work in a corporate environment, there are certain acronyms that feel like they were designed in a lab specifically to drain your will to live.
Oh, absolutely.
And GRC is usually right at the top of that list.
Governance, risk, and compliance. Yeah, it doesn't exactly scream, excitement.
It screams 3-hour meeting that could have been an email, but, and this is a really big but, we're looking at a source today that claims if you're bored by GRC, you are essentially steering your company off a cliff with a blindfold on.
It's true.
We're digging into the GRC Blueprint, Strategic Governance and Risk Mitigation by Alex Seven. This just dropped in January 2025. And the argument here isn't about paperwork. It's about survival.
It really is. And I think the reason people tune out is that they view these things as burdens. Governance is the board yelling at you. Risk is the department that says no to your ideas. And compliance is...
It's avoiding lawsuits.
All right, just keeping the lawyers happy.
Right.
But Alex Seven flips the script completely. He frames this as a structured approach to actually getting what you want as an organization.
Right, and that's the hook for me. The text defines the GRC framework as a tool to align operations with business objectives. Which, okay, sounds nice, but let's be real. Most companies treat these as 3 totally separate silos.
Exactly.
You've got the lawyers doing compliance, the ops team handling risk, and the execs doing governance, and none of them talk to each other until something actually explodes.
And that is precisely the problem Seven identifies. He calls it the silo trap. When these 3 pillars are disconnected, you get inefficiency at best, and at worst, total disaster.
Yeah.
So the mission of this deep dive is to figure out how to move from that fragmented mess to what Seven calls a unified strategy.
Okay, so let's test that theory. To see if this unified strategy actually holds water, I think we need to break down the components first. Let's start with the G, governance. To me, governance always feels like this nebulous concept. It's just the people in charge, right?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's certainly about authority. But Seven argues it's more about the mechanism of authority. He defines governance as the combination of policies, procedures, and practices that guide the organization toward its strategic objectives.
Okay.
Think of it as the operating system of the company.
The operating system. Okay, I like that. So if the OS is buggy, the apps like your products, your sales, they don't run right.
Exactly. And the source breaks governance down into 3 very specific elements. The first is what you were thinking of, the corporate governance structure. This is the hierarchy. The board, the executives, the stakeholders. It defines roles, responsibilities, and crucially, accountabilities.
But isn't that just an org chart?
It's an org chart with teeth. It's not just who reports to whom, it's who is accountable for what. If a decision leads to a massive loss, the governance structure tells you exactly whose desk that decision landed on. Without that clarity, you just have paralysis.
Okay, that makes total sense. Because if nobody knows who holds the bag, nobody takes the risk.
Exactly.
What's the second element?
Policies and procedures. These are the rules of the road.
See, this is where I usually check out. Policies and procedures just sound like that thick handbook HR gives you on day 1. The one that serves mostly as a monitor stand.
Right, but that's a failure of implementation, not the concept itself. Seven argues that these aren't just arbitrary rules. They are the guidelines for ethical behavior and decision-making.
Okay.
Let's use a hypothetical. Say you're running a high-growth fintech startup. You want to move fast. But without clear policies on data privacy or conflict of interest, your move-fast culture inevitably leads to a scandal.
So they're the guardrails.
Yes. The policies are the guardrails that keep the car on the track while you're doing 100 miles an hour.
So it's not about slowing the car down. It's about making sure it doesn't fly off the curve into a wall.
Precisely. And that leads to the third element, which I actually think is the most interesting one in this section. Performance management.
Wait, performance management is part of governance. I usually think of that as an HR thing or like an operations thing.
That's a super common misconception. In the GRC blueprint, performance management is the feedback loop. It's tracking and measuring organizational performance against those strategic goals we talked about.
Ah, okay.
If governance is setting the direction, performance management is looking at the GPS to see if you're actually going that way.
That's a really crucial distinction. Because you can have a great board, your structure, and great rule books, your policies, but if you aren't actually measuring, if you're hitting your targets, you aren't governing. You're just hallucinating.
Hallucinating control. That's a great way to put it. You have to have the data.
All right, so we've got the brain of the operation. Now let's move to the nervous system, or maybe the anxiety center. our risk management.
Department of No.
Right. And 7 says we need to shift our thinking here. It's not about avoiding risk, it's about managing it. But isn't that kind of splitting hairs?
Not at all. Business is risk. If you have zero risk, you probably have zero profit. The source defines risk management as identifying, assessing, and mitigating things that could derail success. It's about being risk-aware, not risk-averse.
Okay, so let's go back to our hypothetical fintech startup. How does this framework actually handle a risk? Because usually it feels like people just worry about everything all at once.
7 outlines a 4-step cycle that cuts through that panic. Step 1 is risk identification. You have to systematically recognize potential threats. For our fintech, that could be a server outage, a new competitor, or a hacker.
Okay, but that list is practically infinite. A meteor could hit the data center, a zombie apocalypse could start. How do you stop this step from just becoming a creative writing exercise in doom?
That is exactly why Step 2 is so critical. Risk assessment. You don't just list risks, you score them. You evaluate them based on 2 factors, likelihood and impact.
The classic matrix.
It's classic for a reason. Let's look at the meteor. Impact, catastrophic, likelihood near zero. So you don't build a bunker, but a phishing attack on your developers. Likelihood is high, impact is high. That's where you focus. 7 argues that most companies fail not because they miss the risks, but because they prioritize the wrong ones.
They get distracted.
Yeah, they spend millions defending against edge cases while leaving the back door unlocked.
That resonates. I've seen companies obsess over market volatility while their internal passwords are literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So once we know the phishing attack is the big bad wolf, what's step 3?
Risk mitigation. This is the action phase. You implement controls to minimize the impact.
So 2-factor authentication, security training, firewalls.
Correct. But here is the kicker. Step 4 is the one that 7 says is most often neglected. Risk monitoring.
Why is that neglected? I mean, you put the firewall up, you're done, right? Move on to the next thing.
That's the set it and forget it fallacy. Risks evolve. Hackers get smarter. Market conditions shift. If you aren't engaging in ongoing tracking of both the risks and the effectiveness of your fixes, your mitigation is rotting.
So the firewall that worked perfectly in 2024 might be a total sieve in 2025. Monitoring is basically asking, is this still working every single day?
Exactly. It ensures that the organization can still achieve its goals despite the changing landscape.
All right, let's tackle the final letter. C, compliance. This is the one that always feels the most rigid. It's the law. You can't really strategize around the law, can you? You just have to follow it.
You'd be surprised. 7 distinguishes between 2 types of compliance, and the nuance here really matters. First, there's regulatory compliance.
That's the external stuff. GDPR, SEC regulations, labor laws.
Right. Meeting industry-specific legal requirements. This is about staying out of jail and avoiding massive fines. For our fintech, this is absolutely non-negotiable.
And the second type?
Internal compliance. This is adhering to the company's own policies and standards. Remember those policies and procedures we talked about in the governance section?
Yeah, the guardrails.
Internal compliance is the mechanism that checks if people are actually following them.
Oh, okay. I see the connection now. So governance writes the internal rules and compliance checks them.
Yes, and the tool for both is monitoring and auditing. It identifies improvement areas. But here is where it gets messy in the real world. Often, internal compliance is actually harder than regulatory compliance.
Really? Why? Because nobody goes to jail if they break a company rule.
Partly, but also because internal rules are self-imposed. It's easy to say we have a policy of zero trust security. But if the CEO finds it annoying to log in 3 times a day, they might bypass it.
Oh, I've seen that.
And suddenly, internal compliance collapses because the culture doesn't support it. 7 emphasizes that compliance isn't just a checklist. It's a culture of adherence.
That's a heavy point. If the boss ignores the rules basically don't exist. Okay, so we've dissected G, R, and C. And up to this point, they still sound like 3 different departments. The legal team, the ops team, the risk team. But the core argument of this text is the power of centralization.
Yes, this is the aha moment of the whole blueprint.
So what happens when you actually smash these silos together? Because practically speaking, that sounds like a nightmare of endless meetings.
It's actually the exact opposite. When you integrate these into a unified strategy, you create incredible efficiency. 7 lists 4 specific benefits, but I want to focus on operational efficiency first because it directly answers your objection about meetings.
Please do, because I'm picturing a committee of 40 people trying to decide on a lunch order, let alone a corporate strategy.
Think about it this way. In a siloed organization, the audit team asks IT for a log of all user access to check for compliance. A week later, the risk team asks IT for a log of all user access to check for security threats.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Then governance asks for a log of user access to check performance metrics.
So IT is pulling the exact same report 3 times for 3 different people who don't talk to each other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a massive waste of time and resources. A centralized GRC framework says we collect this data once, we store it in a central repository. And governance, risk, and compliance all pull from that single source of truth.
That is actually really compelling. You're eliminating redundancies across the board.
You are streamlining processes to boost productivity.
Yeah.
You aren't doing more work, you're getting more value out of the work you're already doing.
Okay, I buy the efficiency argument. It just makes sense. What about the other benefits?
Enhanced decision-making is a huge one. When you have that centralized view, you see the trade-offs clearly. You don't just see, oh, this new product will make money. That's governance. You see this new product will make money, but it introduces a high supply chain risk. That's risk. And it requires a license we don't have yet. That's compliance.
You see the full battlefield.
Right. Better insights lead to better strategic choices. You aren't blindsided by a compliance issue 3 months into a product launch.
And I assume this helps with stakeholder confidence, too. That was one of the other benefits mentioned.
Immensely. Investors and boards love a centralized framework because it demonstrates total control. It shows you aren't just winging it. It proves a commitment to ethical practices and robust management.
It changes the narrative from, well, we hope nothing goes wrong, to we have a unified system to handle whatever goes wrong.
Exactly. And finally, regulatory adherence. If you have a centralized view, you're way less likely to miss a new regulation that applies to a specific part of your business. You mitigate the risk of penalties and reputational damage.
Reputational damage is the big one today. You can survive a fine. It's a lot harder to survive being known as the company that leaked everyone's social security numbers because your risk and compliance teams weren't on the same page.
That is the nightmare scenario.
Okay, so the why is solid. Centralization saves time, saves money, and saves your reputation. Now, for the how, because if I'm a leader listening to this, I'm thinking, this sounds massive. I can't just flip a switch on a centralized GRC framework.
And you shouldn't try to. Alex 7 provides a really practical roadmap. It's 6 steps to implementation. And step 1 is where most people fail immediately.
What's step 1?
Define objectives and scope.
That sounds a bit generic, like we want to do GRC.
And that's too broad. 7 argues you have to align the framework with specific organizational goals. What are we actually trying to achieve here? Are we trying to IPO? Are we trying to expand into Europe? Your GRC framework should be custom-built for that specific goal.
So don't just go out and buy $1 million GRC software suite and then figure out what to do with it.
Exactly. Don't buy a Ferrari if you just need to plow a field. Define the scope first. Then, step 2 is establish governance structures.
This goes back to our org chart with teeth.
Yes. Assigning oversight roles. Who actually owns the GRC framework? Is it a chief risk officer? Is it a dedicated committee? You need a clear owner so things don't fall through the cracks.
Got it.
Step 3.
Identify and assess risks. You can't build the controls until you know what you're controlling. This is doing that homework, the matrix of likelihood and impact we talked about earlier.
And once we have the map of the minefield, step 4 is
develop policies and procedures, writing the actual guidelines that address those specific risks and goals. Then step 5, implement controls and mitigation strategies. So this is the actual deployment.
Right. This is installing the software, training the staff, changing the daily workflows. It's the doing phase.
And finally, step 6. The one you said is the circular trap if you ignore it.
Monitor and review.
It's interesting that monitor shows up in the risk section, it shows up in the compliance section, and now the implementation section. It's kind of the recurring theme of the whole book.
It has to be. The biggest mistake organizations make is treating GRC as a project with a start date and an end date. Like, okay, we finished GRC, now we can go back to our real work.
Right.
No, GRC is the work. Continuous assessment is the only way to keep the framework from becoming obsolete the second you launch it.
That brings up a really interesting tension, though, and I want to push back on the blueprint idea just a little bit. We're talking about structure, rules, controls, centralization. It sounds really heavy.
It certainly can be.
If I'm a startup or even a legacy company trying to pivot quickly, doesn't all this governance and process just kill innovation? Doesn't it slow me down?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? And 7 addresses this implicitly through the idea of strategic governance. The goal isn't to create red tape. It's to create a safe harbor for innovation.
Explain that a bit more.
Think about a Formula One car. It has incredibly strict governance. The engineering is precise, the safety protocols are extreme, the monitoring is constant. Does that make the car slow?
No, it makes it the fastest car in the world.
Because the driver trusts the brakes. Because the team trusts the data. If you didn't have that framework, if the brakes were maybe working and the fuel gauge was just a guess, you'd have to drive 20 miles an hour.
That is a fantastic analogy. So a good centralized GRC framework actually allows you to go faster because you aren't terrified of the wheels falling off.
Exactly. But, and here's the crucial catch, it only works if the framework is agile.
And that leads perfectly into the thought I want to leave you, our listeners, with today. We've talked about monitor and review as a way to check if we are following the rules. But there's a deeper level to this.
Right. This raises a really provocative thought for anyone building one of these centralized systems. A GRC framework is designed to align operations with business objectives. But business objectives change, sometimes overnight.
Yeah. Markets crash.
Right.
New AI emerges. Pandemics happen.
If your GRC framework is too rigid, if it takes 6 months to change a single policy because of your bloated governance structure, then the framework itself becomes a risk.
The shield literally becomes a cage.
Exactly. So the challenge isn't just, do we have a GRC framework? It's, is our GRC framework capable of learning? Can it pivot as fast as the market does? If the answer is no, you haven't built a safety net. You've built an anchor.
That is the scary part. You spend all this time building the perfect system, centralizing everything, and if you make it too perfect, too locked down, you can't move.
That's the paradox of control.
Well, on that slightly terrifying note, we are going to wrap up. We've unpacked Alex Seven's GRC blueprint, moved from the broken silos to the power of a centralized strategy, and hopefully convinced you that those 3 letters, GRC, are actually the secret to driving your Formula One car without crashing.
Just make sure you check the brakes every once in a while.
Always check the brakes. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.